Okay. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Jodi Williamschen. I work at the Library of Congress in the Network Development and MARC Standards Office. I joined the library 2 years ago, right about the time that the latest BibFrame cataloging pilot began. And so that's what I've been working on for the last 2 years.
I joined the library 2 years ago.
Is that a lot of feedback or what's going on?
It's yeah, I just muted the YouTube window. Please continue.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, we're having a little technical difficulty here. This is Laura Ackerman. I'm coordinator of the IGeLU and ELUNA Linked Open Data Working Group, and I'm pleased to present Jodi Williamschen from the Library of Congress. Let's settle down here for a moment. One thing I'll mention is there is a link to a question and answer. Please use that link and don't try to use the comments in YouTube. They don't work. If you have any questions for Jodi afterwards. And I think that's enough for now. Take it away, Jodi.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm Jodi Williamschen from the Library of Congress. I am part of the team in the Network Development and MARC Standards Office who is working on the BibFrame development, and we're in the second year of our cataloging pilot. I did a presentation similar to this that Laura attended in February, and she asked if I could talk to all of you about what we're doing with BibFrame. So first, I've compiled a list of resources. All of these are publicly available, and most of them are linked off our BibFrame homepage, which is loc.gov/BibFrame. If you are just beginning to explore how MARC data becomes BibFrame data, we have a handy comparison tool that you can put in an LCCN and see how a MARC record and a BibFrame record look side by side. You'll see on this screen that you have the option to input a bib ID, and that is the library's Voyager bib ID number. So if you're looking in our catalog, you could find that in MARC tag 001. Otherwise, the LCCN is in MARC tag 010. And this is a side-by-side view. This is our default record that appears. And this is a turtle serialization of the BibFrame data, which I don't personally find that helpful. I usually actually look at the RDF XML, but you do have both options available to choose for serialization. And with BibFrame data, it's very hard to get a complete description to fit on a single PowerPoint slide. So I have just highlighted the data here in MARC tags 336 and 338. And you can see in the turtle representation that the audio disc, which is the carrier, which is a BibFrame property and class, is then the URI that's there for carrier is the ID address for that carrier URI. There's a label, which is what's coming from the subfield A, and then the source is also represented by a URI for the scheme. And it's the same thing for the content, which is at the bottom of the circle. This is the front page of our BibFrame homepage where a lot of stuff links off to. The first section, model and vocabulary, has the data model and the complete ontology. The conversion tools is where I spend most of my time. We recently redid our MARC to BibFrame conversion specifications and conversion programs, which is why they say new version available. And then there's a direct link to the comparison viewer, which was just on the previous screen. On the right side in the What's New box, you have the announcement of the new conversion program and editor tools, and also the agenda from the LC BibFrame update program that was presented at ALA 2 weeks ago. We earlier this year made a public demonstration editor available, and that's at bibframe.org. And it has the same profiles and options as the editor that's currently used by the library's catalogers. We try to keep the this version of the editor as up-to-date as possible so that it reflects what our catalogers are using. The first thing you see on the BIBFRAME editor workspace is, and then you click the Create Resource button, and the drop-down menu of the available profiles will becomes available, and from there you can select to start with an instance or a work. We leave this up to the cataloger's choice, how they choose to start cataloging the material. Our profiles are very format-based because different formats have different characteristics that need to be expressed. For instance, all of our sound recording profiles have a lot of default values for sound and digital characteristics embedded in them, and these are different than the DVD default values, which are different from the feature film values. The rare materials profile was developed in conjunction with a rare book cataloger who's in the BIBFRAME pilot, and she had some specific needs of data quality characteristics that needed to be expressed from rare materials. So I usually use the monograph as an example. If the cataloger chooses to begin with the monograph work, this is what they see. So we have laid out the fields that we have decided are the most important for monograph cataloging, and the cataloger can choose what ones need to be filled in for the material that he or she is describing. On the left is the label. If it's in blue, it's hot linked out to the current iteration of the RDA toolkit, which is using the instruction numbers. When the new RDA toolkit is available, we do not yet know how we will accomplish the same sort of hot linking, but that's something to worry about next year. If you see just a box, like it is for date of work and time coverage of content, these are literal BIBFRAME properties, and all you would do is fill in the data in the box and then click the plus sign to save it. All of the gray boxes are tied to BIBFRAME object properties, which means they're usually pointing to a subsidiary menu, as I've illustrated with the contribution. If the cataloger has contribution fields to add, they would click on this box, and from there they would click on what type of an agent they wanted, and then add in the role. The LC name authority file as it's represented in id.loc.gov. The relationship designators are currently connected to the MARC relator code list, not the RDA relator codes. And finally, at the very bottom, you'll see for content type, the text is already supplied as a default. Where possible, we really try to supply default values because we want to minimize keyboard input by the cataloger, and we want to cut down on typos. We have a lot of drop-down lists for integrated searching of vocabularies that have been loaded onto id.loc.gov. So the first one here in the left is the language list. This is the MARC language list that catalogers use. So it's the 3-character language codes. Below that is a broadcast standard list. This started with the RDA toolkit, and we have incorporated a lot of the I'm sorry, not the RDA toolkit, the RDA registry. The RDA registry term list we have loaded onto ID for access by our catalogers. This was a decision that was made early on in the pilot to ensure vocabulary lists, and perhaps in the future we would reconsider connecting directly out to the RDA registry, although I do not believe that its lookup capability is as robust as we would like. Finally, for form genre, we're connecting to the Library of Congress genre form vocabularies. This is what a work can look like after a cataloger has input it. You can see that some data fields have been completed and some have not. It's completely dependent on the material that the cataloger is working with. The one thing in the editor that I hope to change in the future is if you see under the summary note, the text just kind of stops I'd like to have a better wrapping capability so that it would be easier to see the entire summary note without having to click on the little pencil to open it up. On the second column, you can see some more examples of default values being put in. For language, I see that there's not an editing button available. It's just delete it or leave it. And I think this was a conscious decision we made a while ago to help with the formatting on output, but I don't remember at the moment. This is the instance for that work. The instance data is a bit different than what's on the work. Obviously, it's a bit more piece specific with information like the publisher and the copyright date and the identifiers. We have a lot of identifiers defined within the BIBFRAME ontology, and these are the only ones that we've decided to apply on the monograph side. But if you were to look at the sound recording or the video recording profiles, you would see many more identifier options. And this is the rest of the instance that the cataloger has input, and I've also called out the BIBFRAME item record. This is a very default setup. There is nothing in this BIBFRAME item that is specific to the Library of Congress's Voyager ILS. They're the item properties and classes that were defined in the ontology of the ILS vendors to then go and create a supplemental ontology that would be system specific, so that you would have like a BF Alma ontology that would reflect item specific details that are unique to the Alma system. We have talked about doing that internally for our Voyager system, but we haven't had time to look at it. One of the things that we would really like to do is load in all of the Voyager location codes so that for the held in sublocation option, the catalogers could find the location that they wanted from a drop-down list rather than having to type it in. After the cataloger is finished creating or editing their description, we have a process called posting, which takes the data from the editor and puts it into our BIBFRAME triple store. And this is the interface that our catalogers see internally. It's pretty basic. The filtering options are very much designed for catalogers and troubleshooting and analysis by us in the network development office. And it's not exceptionally pretty to look at. It's just very basic. This is the work for the title we saw earlier, and here's the instance. Loaded all of our BIBFRAME works and instances into id.loc.gov so that everybody can search for individual BIBFRAME works or instances. Previously, the data was only available as a bulk download, and since it's 19 million works and 21 million instances, you would need a really big triple store to store all of it. So this is another option if you want to see an individual BIBFRAME work or instance. So this is the work display for the title we've been looking at. It's a bit more user-friendly. It follows more of the design of ID. Anywhere that there's a hot link, if you were to click on literature, women, authors, you would go actually to the subject heading record for that, and you would see all of the works in this database that use literature, women, authors as a subject. You also have output options down at the bottom on the right side, so that if you wanted to output this individual data for your own analysis, you could pick your output option. And here's the instance of the same work with all of the instance level details that we saw in the editor. And as I said earlier, elements within these descriptions are then hot linked to id.loc.gov. So this is an example of unmediated within that instance record going out to unmediated from our vocabulary list. If you were to click on the LCCN, it would actually take you to catalog.loc.gov and you could see the actual MARC record. So bibframe.org is our public editor site. If you click on the BIBFRAME editor, you can, when else is put in, You can also go into the BIBFRAME profile editor, make some changes to one of the existing profiles, and then see how that data is changed in the editor. The BIBFRAME editor descriptions, if you input something and save it, it will stick around until we clear the database, which we have yet to do. And any changes that you make to the BIBFRAME profile editor are only valid for that session. Whoops, wrong way. So when you're looking at the BIBFRAME editor workspace, you'll see this is the browse display. On the far left corner is a system assigned hash ID number that is much longer than what you display, but we have shortened it to get some more vital information on display. We've added in the primary contribution, which is analogous to MARC tag 1XX. Then we have the title, the LCCN, the cataloger ID, the last modified date, and then some editing, either edit or delete options. I can tell from this screen that most of the data that's been input here is not applicable. And also earlier this year, we redesigned the id.lsc.gov page. And now you can see in the upper left that we have the BIBFRAME works and instances available for searching. And then following below that, the subject and thesauri options, and then the agents, the genre. The middle column that says cataloging is a lot of the RDA registry lists that we have added in for access within the BIBFRAME editor. Along with the RDA registry terms, we've also added in some terms that are defined within the MARC format. So if you look in the MARC format at certain fields in MARC tag 007 or 008, they have some standard values that are supplied. And we've tried to translate those values from just being a list within the MARC format to being a vocabulary list here with a URI and ID. And here's a little bit about our current BIBFRAME cataloging pilot. It started when I arrived in May of 2017, which is just a coincidence. At that time, there were 50 catalogers who were trained in inputting cataloging metadata into the new iteration of the BIBFRAME editor. We added in lookups in the first 6 months, we had probably doubled the number of controlled vocabulary lookups that there were. In May of 2017, the entire LC catalog was converted from MARC to BIBFRAME. Since only a small percentage of the library's catalogers are working in BIBFRAME, our BIBFRAME database is updated every day with activity that occurs in the previous day in Voyager. So if a cataloger who is not part of the BIBFRAME pilot inputs a MARC record into Voyager today, it will be in the BIBFRAME database and available to the BIBFRAME catalogers tomorrow. And this includes the NACO data, which is added into ID every day. And our more recent developments, in January of 2018, we got the software to work for posting or publishing the descriptions back to our internal database so that it's a very up-to-date reflection of the current cataloging at the library. In April of 2018, based on cataloger feedback, we added the ability to take a description from the BIBFRAME database, load it into the editor so that the cataloger could augment it, which was the start of a copy cataloging workflow. One of the things that we learned in the pilot is that almost every cataloging activity in the library begins with a very brief MARC record that's either been supplied by a vendor or input as part of the acquisitions process. And by giving the catalogers the ability to take this brief description and to complete the cataloging in the BIBFRAME editor and then send it back to our BIBFRAME database. Last summer, we added some new editor features, including the ability to clone descriptions. So if you had a stack of maps that all had the same publisher, you could conceivably create a skeleton record for the work in the instance, fill in the data, clone it over, fill in just the data that changed, and save it to cut down on repetitive key input. Last fall, we began reviewing how works are merged in the database. Initially, a lot of the works were merging, which was sort of desired from a linked data point of view, but we determined that there was a lot of data loss occurring, particularly illustrators of children's books. So we would have all of these different works and instances for, say, Little House on the Prairie. They would all merge together, but the unique illustrators for each particular edition of that book were lost. So what we're working on now is having more links between works and less data loss. And so we need to look more at building out how our relationship model works. Coming in a couple of weeks, we will be expanding the number of pilot participants from 50 to 100. And they actually start training in 2 weeks. And we are also this summer working on the ability to take data that is input in the BIBFRAME editor and turn it back into MARC data. Currently, all of the catalogers in the pilot catalog each material twice, first in the BIBFRAME editor and then in MARC. The library has responsibility for MARC record distribution, and at this point, we don't have a way to move the data back and forth. By completing the BIBFRAME to MARC data conversion piece, we hope that the catalogers will then only catalog in the BIBFRAME editor, and the MARC record will be created by the machine and then distributed out into the Voyager database and beyond. That's all I had, but I'm certainly willing to answer questions, and we could try some live look-ins on how the data is structured. So if I'm going to hit escape here and go back to the Hangout. Hopefully that worked.
Okay.
That doesn't look good.
That doesn't look good, but it's interesting. I think I have a slide that I want to share that just has some basic information. I'm going to turn off the camera.
Jodi, hi, this is Itai.
Slide, and then we can get into questions. I'm not seeing any questions yet on the question and answer page, although I tested it. Application.
Laura, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Okay, let me introduce you briefly.
Thank you.
We have in the studio Itai Veldsman from Ex Libris. And we invited him because he is product manager for Alma, who is in charge of developing BIBFRAME editing capabilities in the Ex Libris Alma library management system. So they're getting started. They have a plan, a roadmap, and we'll be getting into developing this editor during 2020. So I was sure he would have some questions for Jodi. Do you?
Yeah, I actually have a few. First, I want to say that I'm very impressed with the extensive work you've done so far, and also with, if I understood correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, your coverage of all the catalog, which is, if I understand, is 100% today in BIBFRAME.
Yes.
Which is really impressive, and I think it's a really important milestone. The second thing I want to ask about the conversion, the crosswalk between BIBFRAME and MARC 21. Is your plan is to use the same tool just in kind of a reverse order? You already have the tool of converting MARC 21 to BIBFRAME, or it's a different tool?
I'm not exactly sure.
Okay.
We are working with Index Data. They're our contractor for the development on these tools. And the MARC to BIBFRAME is more of an XSLT conversion, and I'm not sure if that's going to be the same for the BIBFRAME to MARC or if something else will be used. We've also been talking with Index Data about using some other sort of software,
Okay,
which
no,
I
that's
do
fine.
not
I
remember the
understand.
name of. Sorry. But the specking out is a little bit different because you're having to list this whole chain of, you know, if it's a contributor or contribution, agent, and then you jump into the MADS RDF ontology in terms of translating it back to MARC. The current specs are very detailed, and we're now really looking at areas of duplication. There's a lot of duplication between data in the 007 and particularly the new 3-4X fields. And we're trying to decide how much of that duplication we are going to perpetuate and how much we are going to cut.
Okay. Additional question I have is, do you have any kind of view or a way, or if you're thinking about it, showing the relationship between the work and instances?
We're still evaluating the relationships and how to express them. It's almost more of a visual question because there's a lot of hot linking back and forth between it, and which I was unable to fully express because PowerPoint and data displays are really incompatible. I would recommend looking at some of the data on ID. So you search for the work, see how it's linked to instances, see how it's linked to contributors and subjects. Let's see if I'm still sharing, I think.
Another
So if
kind
I
of,
was...
yeah, sorry. I want to show something.
I was just curious. Do y'all see ID now?
Yeah, we can see a screen.
Click on it. Yes.
Okay, so this was the example I was using during ALA. I'm searching works for Michelle Obama's book. Fortunately, only one appears. So this is the work description, and you can see over here on the right where it's linked to the instance, and then if you click on that, you go to the instance. From there, you can go to the item. You can go back to the work. This is as far as we've gotten really with displays. What is interesting is if I click on her heading here,
okay,
it's thinking. A lot of bots have been hitting ID lately, so the response time has dropped a bit.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah,
it's really very popular.
Okay, so this is Michelle Obama's record in the LC name authority file. So here's all the information that would be in the MARC authority record. And then over here, because all of the data has been loaded, you can see where this heading is used as a subject, and then things where it's been used as an author. So this is really getting at more of the linking and linked data, even though it's not the most visually exciting screen to look at.
No, I'm interested about the data for now. The visual, I understand it's actually the visual is one of the challenges we kind of trying to, crack as part of our future way. Okay, it's very interesting how to see the information here, and I saw you have different views. So you have the editing mode and you have the view mode, and you have different viewing showing in different formats, so it make it easier for the different person to read it. Is there any, as you foresee or you conclude for now, any changes in the cataloging processes? It means, all kind of things that came even from very old habitats, or things that came that now are changing, or it's more like doing the same in a different ontology?
One thing that we keep talking about internally is cutting down on the amount of transliteration that is done for non-Roman data character sets. Right now, there's an awful lot of it that's done in the descriptive areas. And we're looking at, is it really necessary, or should everything just be represented in its native script? It's been a lot of discussion, but no formal policy changes have been made yet. We also have talked about how to represent works when they go back in BIBFRAME conversion. The title and name title authority records become MARC work records, because if you think about it in music in particular, all of those symphonies that are set up as authority records are really works. What we don't know yet is what we're going to do when they go back from BIBFRAME to MARC. Our music catalogers have augmented some of those work records to add subjects, and subjects is not a valid field in the MARC authority format. So we're still figuring out what needs to be done with that. At one point, we talked about creating MARC work records and MARC instance records, but the problem with that is that there's no system that could knit those two together in a MARC structure for discovery and display.
I see.
Other things that we've talked about are really trying to cut down on the number of data points that are in controlled fields, like the 007 and the 008.
Okay.
And also, I think what will have an even bigger impact in the near term is the new RDA toolkit and the new representations within RDA for things like diachronic works and aggregators.
Okay. Another question is, when I'm talking about the editor itself, when your 50 catalogers use it, what kind of things are coming up in the matter of finding or and linking the information between bibliographic record you are describing and for example, author? Let's take this as an example.
Well, let's see what's in the editor today. We have had some complaints from catalogers about that the editor interface is currently very mouse dependent, which is more of an ergonomic and ADA issue. Oh, and it's also very slow. Okay, so one thing that I'm particularly not fond of is that this particular editor interface is very dependent on menuing to set up a lot of the ontology, to make sure that a lot of the RDF is output correctly. Because in my world, the fact that class should not require that this separate menu has to pop up every time you want to input a note. I would expect more of that encoding to be deeper down in the editor software. So that the cataloger would get more of like how the literals look here, where you just type without having to click into things. They like the standard values are supplied wherever possible because it does cut down on the amount of repetition. Our programmers particularly like that things like role are tied to a list, because one of our developers went through and found the 200 different ways that author is typed in subfield E in the different contribution fields. And if the catalogers have drop downs to choose from, it just cleans up your data so
now,
much.
if I see here correctly, if there is a eventually there is a kind of limitation of repeatable and non-repeatable, or is actually everything now is always repeatable because I don't have any constraint on structure?
We do not have a lot of constraints built in at this time because every time we try to put them in, it seems like we break something. But what would ideally happen is that where you only wanted one data element, you could set it up as non-repeatable. I'm trying to think where we have it, where we have tried and failed. For instance, here for a mode of issuance, even you could put into. Okay, so here's an example for file type. You can't add another value here, so we do have a constraint put on it. So if you didn't want it to say audio file, you'd have to trash it, and then it would open up, and you could pick something else. So for that one, we probably have it set up to be non-repeatable. We haven't really explored a lot about mandatory fields, except in one area. We have started opened up that the catalogers could create their own templates. I don't know if many of them are doing it, but we've offered it, we set it up as an option so that if you wanted to create your own I haven't used this lately. So right now, what I'm doing is creating my own template. So anything that's a mandatory field, you don't have the option to turn off or on. So like a title is mandatory, you can't choose. But say I don't want to put in a statement of responsibility, I can turn that off. I don't want to transcribe the provider statement, I can turn that off. And then if I save it, please save. Okay, so it has been removed and the transcribed provider statement has been removed. But these are locally stored for the cataloger on their workstation. So I don't think they're very transportable, but it is a way of cutting down on fields.
Mm-hmm.
But it's pretty basic. We haven't done a lot of work with it. But that's really the only place where we're getting into mandatory fields at all. Because if I wanted to edit it again, yeah, like see here, the LCCN is mandatory.
I see, so it doesn't have a switch.
So this is sort of it's the sort of beginning of mandatory, not mandatory. So this isn't really a true application profile because if it was, you could have mandatory elements within each sort of option, and we're not there yet.
Okay, I understand. Another question, a general one. We kind of, distinguish from our perspective between what we call personas, which represent from when we look on, all kind of user research and user experience perspective. We kind of refer to three kind of archetype, you will say. So we talking about original cataloger, copy catalogers, and what we tend to call light cataloger, kind of things. So I don't know exactly, I don't know what your group of catalogers that are part of this experiment and this project are. You said most of them are original cataloger type, which the ones that knows quite a lot.
Most of them in the original pilot and up to now have been sort of fully full professional catalog. The description, the analysis, they create the access points, they propose the subject changes. We are talking about expanding it. The next or the people coming in might be more technicians who would be doing SIP verification for verifying when that the cataloging and publication data is correct. I'm not completely sure about all of the workflows that the cataloging departments use, but we're working on a manual for using the editor that is addressing some of the workflows. And as long as our catalogers have to finish their work in MARC, a lot of the only difference has really been that they also do this work in BIBFRAME.
I see. Okay. Thank you very much, Jodi. So far, I got a lot of information. I'm sure it's just the beginning of much more discussions around it, and I hope we can collaborate more, on things we think can share more. But I think
Right.
for now, I'm
you.
getting a very good picture of the project. And again, it's a great job. I really appreciate your information here.
Thank you, Itai.
Yeah, this is really just a cataloging tool right now. It's not integrated in any way with acquisitions and circulation or serials check-in.
So I want to jump in here. We do have some questions now from people who have been following along. And I'm just going to go through them quickly. And some of them I think would have long answers, but are there technical difficulties? Yes, there were. And maybe the sound quality is not so great. We don't have video, so you can see how lovely Jodi is, but we're here. Will the presentation be available afterward? Yes, we're saving it, and it should be available at the same spot on YouTube. Is LC interested in incorporated wiki data URIs? If so, how? That's a question for you.
They have been incorporated in ID situation, but if you go into id.loc.gov, search in the name authority files, you will start seeing links to Wikidata and to VIAF.
Okay.
So, because there has been a project about that. We do not currently incorporate Wikidata identifiers in the BIBFRAME editor, but it's something we've talked about.
Okay. What steps are involved in getting started with BIBFRAME? I don't know if there's an answer to that. Go to the BIBFRAME website, perhaps. Getting started with BIBFRAME.
Also go to the Catalogers Learning Workstation, which is part of the Program for Cooperative Cataloging section on loc.gov. That all of the training materials that we use to train our catalogers are posted
that's very good. I didn't know about it.
And actually, yesterday, Paul Frank sent out an announcement to the PCC listserv, PCC list, which has a general overview of places that people can look.
Okay. We'll try to corral that information and get it out to our mailing list. Where's OCLC in all this? Are they expected to buy into BIBFRAME in the near future? I don't know if you can answer them.
I think I missed.
I
missed the start of the question.
Where is OCLC in all this?
I did miss the start because I only heard LC. I do not know. OCLC has had some interesting linked data projects of their own in terms of entity reconciliation, but I don't know what their long-term plans are. The linked data that you see on WorldCat is very schema-based, so I'm not sure where their interests lie at this time.
Same thing. Okay, well, what's LC's plan to completely shift from MARC to BIBFRAME?
Says every time he discusses this that he sees it as being like on a 5 to 10 year horizon for a complete switchover, but then every year it's still a 5 to 10 year horizon, so it keeps shifting. There is an acknowledgement within the library that MARC is not going away fast. There's a lot of systems that are still dependent on MARC. There are a lot of data vendors who have been taught MARC and probably have a really crusty old program going on that converts their data into MARC to be sent to OCLC and to individual libraries. And it's just going to take a long time for those sort of processes to transition to a new data model. This is why we have been really coming to understand the importance of a BIBFRAME to MARC conversion.
Okay. We have 2 more questions, or 3, actually. So I gather there's another anonymous question. Says, is there a deadline to implement BIBFRAME? And I'm gathering from your answer that
I am not aware of any deadline.
Whew.
If the progress on BIBFRAME is reported to the Librarian of Congress like twice a year, the development of BIBFRAME is part of the overall library strategic plan, but
Okay.
I'm not aware of
Marcus
any
June
timeline.
asks, do Library of Congress catalogers like cataloging in the BibFrame editor versus cataloging in Voyager or OCLC collection client? And is the BibFrame editor more clicky with drop-down menus and pop-up menus? And I think you mentioned something.
The BibFrame editor is very clicky, drop-down oriented. The catalogers all say the editor has gotten a lot better since the whole pilot started. They keep saying it's better than it used to be. I don't know what it was like in the first pilot since that was before I arrived. I just think that part of it, there's just a learning curve and becoming more comfortable with the new interface is that our serials catalogers mostly work in the concert database in OCLC, and we're trying to figure out how to get the BibFrame editor and that particular database to interact. And we also have to figure out how to do cataloging and publication in BibFrame, because that is a completely separate system where that data is created and then it's put into Voyager. So there's some external systems that we have to figure out how to interact with too.
Okay.
And I think they're becoming more accepting of all of this, and they are starting to push our development in different ways as they start becoming more comfortable with the editing, and they start saying, well, why can't we do this? And we say, let's find out.
So, well, that's good. And you're listening. Okay. We realize this is a work in progress, but very, very, very interesting. I want to go back and watch, and then I'll have more questions. Last question from Stephen Hearn. In addition to the differences between BibFrame works based on Illustrator differences, there are also many common features based on the text they have in common. Does BibFrame provide efficient ways to replicate common elements, e.g. subjects, across the BibFrame work records differentiated by illustrators?
You could use the cloning option within the editor to do that. Mm-hmm. And we do need to work on some other tools probably for things like that. One of the developers are working on a slightly different relationship model where we have what are essentially superworks, but we're calling them hubs, where it's just really skeletal, non-format based data. And then from that radiating out to individual works, and from there to individual instances. So I think of it more as a hub and spoke linking instead of glomming everything onto a single work. But this is a fairly recent development, so who knows what we're going to be doing 6 months from now.
Is it I immediately have to ask this question. So is it closer to, would that hub be closer to an RDA work concept?
No, it would probably be closer to a res concept in RDA.
Okay. Now I have to go study up on that. Thank you. I wish we could just stick around. I'm sure there are tons more questions I'd love to ask you, but I want to say thank you. Thank you from the IGeLU ELUNA linked open data working group. I had a slide I was going to share that had all of our particulars, but I think just Google it. There's a lot of information. We are sponsoring, and we'll hope to sponsor in the future, more show and tells with use cases and interesting linked data information. Thank you to Itai for coming and asking some very good questions, and to Mehmet Çelik, who was our engineer. And I guess we're signing off now.
Thank you.